Hey there, Sue. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. This is a long time coming. We've been after you to be on this. You've been on our list to kind of bring you in and have chat with you about math education and what you're doing. And specifically, we're going to chat about early mathematics and also your summit session that's coming up in November for the Make Math Moments virtual summit. But before we get into that and what attendees are going to learn and what they're going to learn here today, let everybody know where you're coming from because you're over on the east side like us, but you're a lot closer to the ocean than we are.
I am. Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here and also have been looking forward to this opportunity. I am out on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, um, and I am enjoying being in this location. This is my office when I'm not in a school. But when I'm in schools, which is most of the time, I am working with teachers to help them improve their instruction through consulting work. So that's what I'm doing.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. And before we dig in any deeper, we always like to take a little bit of a time machine back into the past. And we like to ask our guests, every guest on the show, about their math moment. And this could be a math moment that maybe had a positive impact on your life, or it could be a math moment that maybe, wasn't so positive in the past, but probably gave you an opportunity to learn something. When we say math class or mathematics, what is that math moment that pops into your mind?
I love that question. And I've thought about this. And the story that I want to tell is when I was in second grade. So I was in second grade and we were learning about subtraction.
Hmm.
And we had to use these number lines. They were stuck on our desks. And the strategy we all had to use was to use this number line. So I remember the teacher said something like, you can't do 2 minus 5. And I sat there and I thought, I think I can. So I raised my little hand and I said, well, wouldn't that just be like 3 less than 0? And she looked at me and she said, no, you can't do that. And I accepted that. It was the
Hmm.
70s. You didn't question authority. But it bothered me and it stayed with me to this day. And then I hit seventh grade where they introduced us to negative numbers. And I
Right.
literally went, I knew it.
I knew there was something else.
I
You
knew
just
it. Like
get
I
up
knew.
from your desk, walk out, and walk down that hallway to find that teacher.
Look
You're
at
like, wait
I,
a.
this. Look at this
right.
thing right here.
Right. And so I knew like I liked numbers. I knew about infinity and I kind of had this idea they could just keep going that way too. Um, and I like this story because, I was a little bit feisty in my own mind, but I was a model student. But in my own mind, I was so persistent to understand, and I had these big ideas that no one seemed to want me to have. Nobody wanted
Mm.
to hear about my curiosity. They just wanted me to stay in line. And
Hmm.
so I did in the classroom. But, I bring that into my work with teachers and students that everybody comes to the table with a lot going on, and we ought to be curious about what it is that they do know.
I love it. I love it. It's an important lesson for us as educators to always, even if we don't know the answer, let's say, like imagine that teacher didn't know that integers were a thing, for example, is leaving the student with an opportunity to continue pondering, like rather than shutting it down. I think by nature we
Right.
want to like shut down the unknown or shut down something that in our minds, like she maybe could have been like, I don't want the whole class to go down this rabbit hole. We're working on this very specific thing. And then
That's
all
it,
of a
I think.
sudden Susan shows up and derails the whole lesson. Like that's probably what the teacher's
Right.
feeling. So I always like to
That's
try to empathize with teachers, but then it's like, what can we do
what's the
differently
question?
to not shut you down? And the why I'm envisioning this happens a lot with my children are in elementary school. And a lot of times they'll say things, and I don't know what was really said. This is the other part. And I never want to
Right.
over interpret. But this morning, my daughter said, we are doing roots and we are doing powers and roots. And then she drew the, sort of square root sign, which was what we all learned first, and there was no number there. And I just threw out this like interesting thought into the world. And she kept saying the root of 81 is 9, the root of these things. And I was like, honey, did you know that there's actually like an extended name for that? It's called the square root. And then we talked about, cubed roots and things like that. And so you can even put this 2 here. She's like, we don't put that 2 there. Like it's like almost like a rule. Now, I'm not saying the teacher said that, but that's the interpretation that she had. And it's almost like trying to just shift, things in math class just to this, like this curiosity, this wonderment, this like anything's possible sort of mindset, I think is so important, because I think we get so stuck in the procedural. We want to make sure that everyone has, everyone's able to achieve this sort of base level standard, let's say, that we had for that grade level. And that is a huge, I don't know, big epiphany that I'm having as I listen to your math moment. And, I think it's a great lead in. You're talking about counting. First of all, I want to give props to your teacher, because there was a number line on your desk. I don't think I ever saw a number line on my desk. So they were using some tools, right, to represent and strategies. And I think it leads in nicely to your summit session, because your summit session is actually going to be talking about counting routines. And I think when we get into things like counting routines and different types of math routines around number sense, I think it sort of leans on what you learned as a student, is that there's different ways to do things, and sometimes certain ways doing things that are more efficient than others in different scenarios. So I wonder, tell the audience, what's your session all about? And like, what's the big idea here? What are they going to sort of take away from the session that they're going to experience coming in November?
So the big idea is to delve deeply into the complexity of counting. And I feel that early childhood is overlooked and misunderstood to be quite simple. Like, oh, we just teach them to count. But there's many, many layers to it. And if we sort of speed through that, we build almost like a house of cards. We have to really think deeply about this foundation. And so this session is kind of presenting the research that tells us about how important early childhood is. And then looking at some practical strategies so that you can bring counting with understanding into your classroom in routine ways, but that also allow for that curiosity and that exploration, and really a constructivist approach to understanding our counting system.
Yeah. And I agree. I think when my wife's an early childhood educator, and she's often works with kindergarten teachers and paired with different kindergarten teachers, at different points in her career. And it seems like there's a lot of like, when you talk with either parents or with some educators, it's glossed over that we're just helping kids count to 10. And that's what we're doing in kindergarten, and we're doing in early math. And I think you're right. It's kind of like they just hey, I'll just show them count like this. And there's not a lot of thought going into how to unpack that. And, should we be looking at how to represent the symbol and connecting the symbol to the actual quantity? And then, like, do we feel 3? Do we see 3? Like, how do we represent these different things? Like, why do you think it is so glossed over, for so many educators to be like, this is just, we're just going to jump, it's not that big of a deal? Or do you think maybe the educators you are talking to is they know it's a big deal, but maybe they're just not sure exactly what to do to count, to help students learn their counting up to
Yeah,
10?
it's a really good question. I think it is glossed over, not by those teachers that are teaching those ages. I think you're right. They know how complex it is because they have students that struggle to understand.
Right.
But I think for one example, in the United States, we have our Common Core for state standards, and it begins with kindergarten. Where's pre-K? What's happening with our
Right.
3 and 4 year olds? And if we look at our teacher prep programs, I mean, in my doctorate, I focused on early childhood and I deeply read every piece of research that was out there. But there's not a specific course in maybe early childhood math. I mean, we're lucky if teacher prep has one course in preparation for teaching mathematics, never mind focusing on the specifics about early childhood. And so maybe we lean into literacy for early childhood with all of that language development. And
Mhm.
I just think it's not focused on for all of those reasons. But the educators in the trenches know kindergarten teachers will speak loudly and say, like, wait a minute, it's different in here, right?
Mm.
It's different.
I love it. I love it. And, this is a really important piece. And I think, the idea of thinking about counting beyond the idea of just stable order or rote counting is really important. And unfortunately for us as educators, if we're not sort of able to notice and name what's happening, right? When
Right.
students are counting, we're not flexible with sort of like the different stages, the different routines, as you had mentioned, makes it very difficult for us to first identify where the struggle might be, but then also to follow up with what is the routine that might be able to help them. So I'm wondering, like, are there any sort of maybe signs that educators might be able to look for, like, and aside from the fact that a student's unable to just keep stable order, but are there some maybe go-tos or sort of common signs that you notice fairly quickly when you're working with a student, maybe it's one-on-one or in a small group, that hey, there might be a challenge here, and what might that look like and sound like as a next step for educators?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really specific tasks that give us a window into whether or not a child is truly counting with understanding, or are they just giving us the illusion of that? And so, one of the tasks that we give students is to have them count some objects and tell us how many are there. So, we might scatter, I don't know, might only be 6 objects on the table, right? Just stay within their range where they know the number of words. We're noticing if they're tagging the objects and saying one number for each word. But I'm trying to get at cardinal understanding. Do they know how many are there? So
Mhm.
they do all those things right. And they hit that last object and they say 6. And then they look at you and say, there are 6 objects. And then what I can do, and you can kind of see yourself as like teacher, as researcher, scooch those things around right in front of them and then say, so by scooch, I'm moving my hands around the
Yeah.
screen if you're
Yeah.
listening, right? Move them around
Everyone's got a
and
vision of scooch, like what
right,
that
what's
is,
I
scooch?
I
I
was
Right.
like
thinking
that.
like, if you're probably thinking I'm
Scooch in your
scooching, like,
seat.
oh yeah,
I
my
know, I
seat.
realize. Yeah. Okay. Move the objects
Objects can scooch,
around.
John. Come
Sure, you just
on.
got to
It
nudge
doesn't
them.
have to be people.
Oh my goodness. Move the objects around. They've told you there are 6, and then look at your student and say, how many objects are there? And if they count again,
Hmm.
this might be, and I say might be because it's only
Mm-hmm.
one question,
Sure.
an indication that they don't have cardinal understanding. So I
Hmm.
often will stop the student and say, do you know how many are there, or do you need to count them again? And they'll be super clear because I'm probably talking to a 4, 5, or 6 year old, and they'll say, yes, I need to count again. Or occasionally they'll say, no, there are 6. But when they hear how many are there, what a young child hears is, I have just been asked to do that thing where I touch each object
Right.
and I say these words, and then I'm supposed to repeat the last one. But what they don't know, and what I'm going to do again is gesture, is that all I'm circling, that whole collection is 6.
Mm-hmm.
That last object is not called 6, and it's not a command to say 6. So that you had asked me, what is a task that can give me a window into sort of what a student knows and doesn't know? That's one of my favorite tasks. We'll
Mm.
call it the Sue
Hmm.
Looney scooch task.
Oh, I love it. The Sue Looney scooch. It has like a ring to it, doesn't it?
I know.
Yeah.
All the kids are like, can we go scooch with
Yeah.
Miss in the corner over
Right.
there? You know?
Now, let me ask you, let me get your take on this, Sue. Is in this, I think this relates to like your moment that you talked about. Like you were talking about, like you wanted to talk, think about negative numbers and thinking about basically what you were doing was what Kyle was saying is the teacher probably shut you down because it's like if we go down that pathway, that's a whole other ball game. But we don't have time for that. This is not what the learning goal today was, and they kind of just didn't handle maybe it right, and it stuck with you all these years. But think about if we think about early years, I think there is that tendency to say we shouldn't go into, trying to explore using base 10 blocks. We shouldn't be going past, talking about fractions. We shouldn't be getting into decimals because that's just down the road. But what is your take on like extending past, just counting to count with fractions, to count with decimals, to count with different, say, units, so that we're building this strong foundation for the future?
So in terms of how far do we go? I mean, that's an on the spot decision in the moment. And so maybe the right thing for that teacher to do is to not admit that there were numbers less than zero. But she might have said that's a conversation that I'll have with you later or put it aside. But children really do need to be solid in counting and have cardinal understanding of number before they can reason about problem solving. And so we might be able to teach them to add. They might be able to memorize their addition and subtraction facts. But if they don't understand that six is six and it's collectively a group of six and how to decompose six, that other stuff
It
is
doesn't
just
really matter.
no.
No, no.
No, I love that. And there is something to be said there about, and again, it's so almost obvious when we dig into something because counting feels so simple to us as adults, right? So counting's a great example, but it's interesting because all along the math trajectory, this same conversation needs to be happening, right? So it's the same with
Yes.
addition. Like, hey, if we're doing addition, if we memorize addition facts, but we don't recognize that 8 is 2 more than 6, and we can't visualize the magnitude of number, and then we go to multiplication and division, and it just keeps going and going and going. And it really just comes down to like this messaging I'm hearing you say here is that conceptual understanding is so important. It's paramount. And that all of the procedural things that we do oftentimes can get us to get over a particular hurdle in this journey called AKA testing or, hitting the checklist and so forth. It's not that helpful to us if we can't actually utilize it and actually be able to see it. So I heard you say something earlier, which I think is really important for all of us to remember, regardless of if it's counting or any other concept, that when we go further, we need to come all the way back and we need to work our way through. So it's this idea of like kind of, it's very iterative, right? Where it's not just about pushing forward and just constantly moving on to the next day, the harder concept. It's about seeing how does that connect to what we already know and what we're comfortable with? Because the reality is we learn something new. It's not going to be immediately understandable, right? We're going to have to go like, okay, this is new. How does it connect to what I already know? And that requires coming back. It's like touching home base. We've talked about this a lot. It's like come back, touch home base. And it's like hopefully home base keeps moving up where you feel comfortable and confident and we can keep going into the unknown and coming back to the known. So I hope people are listening to this and sort of utilizing counting as this means. It's not just about counting here. And that I want to argue that for those who are maybe thinking, I'm a grade 5 teacher, or maybe I'm a grade 7 teacher, we're into multiplicative thinking. It's like maybe this session isn't important for me, but I would argue it's the exact opposite. It's very difficult for me to help students who are struggling down the road if I can't come all the way back myself to touch home base, right? So if I have a student who's struggling with counting and now it's just showing up in multiplication, then it's not nothing I do in multiplication land is going to really be helpful unless we go back and ensure we strengthen what that student needs. So I'm loving this concept, and I'm really hoping that those who are listening are going, you know what, maybe this counting session, even if I'm not pre-K or K or grade 1 or 2, that I'm actually going to, peer in here and see what else is going on under the hood that maybe I didn't recognize. So at this point, I'm hoping here we're really pumping tires on this session. I really believe it's super important. I'm wondering if someone does come to this session, what would you say is that big hope dream for yourself? If there's like one thing that when they leave that session, they'll remember about the time they spend with you at our virtual summit coming up, what's that thing that you're hoping they walk away with?
Count, 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 count. Whether we're counting multiples or fractions, whether we're counting by millions or, any kind of new number, we need to give kids that opportunity to learn the language, recognize the patterns, understand the quantity, and just really make sense of whatever number category they're in. So any opportunity that you can come up with and find, right on up through the grades. It's not counting, it's specific when I'm thinking of the number sequence to 10 or 20 or et cetera to early childhood, but the concepts are not. They extend all the way through.
You're absolutely right. We just spoke with Shelley Yearley and Tara Flynn, who's done a significant amount of work with Kathy Bruce on rethinking fractions, and they emphasize the importance of counting by the unit fraction. So like 1/1/2, 2/1/2, like it's a unit, and we can count by the unit. And I don't, Kyle, I don't remember if I mentioned this on that podcast episode, but it reminded, it's when I think about like trigonometry and using the unit circle to figure out the exact values for certain trigonometric ratios, students, if you're teaching degrees and counting by degrees, it's a lot actually harder than when you're using that unit circle and using radians, because you're in fractions and you're counting by like pi over 4. So it's like 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4. It's like it's such a
it's identical.
It's identical, and it's like so important. And you're talking with advanced functions or students who are taking pre-calculus and relating it back to the concepts about just counting techniques and making sure it sounds like it's too basic, but it's not. It's something that's overlooked, throughout the grades as a fundamental skill. So I just wanted to toss that in there. I'm excited for your session, Sue. We're pumped to have you. Your session, I believe, is going to be scheduled on Friday evening, and we're ready to kind of lock in and talk about counting with the Make Math Moments community. So we're excited for that. If you have not yet registered, get on over to makemathmoments.com/summit, folks, and get yourself registered. Choose Sue's session, lock yourself in there, get your ticket. It is a completely free weekend event. And Sue, we're hoping 20,000 teachers register this year. We've had 15,000 for the last few years register. We're hoping for 20,000 this year, and we're pumped for your session. So thanks so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom with the community.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. My friends, where can folks find more information about you there, Sue, so that they can geek out on more Sue Looney content, but then also so that they can share amongst their circles so we can hit that 20,000 goal for the summit?
There's two places to find me. So one is my main website, which is just looneymath.com, and there's a newsletter that you can sign up for. I have free resources and point at all kinds of great stuff there. And then also samebutdifferentmath.com is another website where you can find me at.
There's no scoochmath.com yet?
Not yet.
Okay. But maybe in the future, right? Maybe in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sue. And look forward to seeing you in November.